Avicii is one of the most popular DJs of modern time, performing music in the EDM style. Among the notable features of the artist, there is not only the unique sound of the melody, but also the impact his music has had on such important social movements in the LGBTQ community, particularly transgender people. In his track "Silhouettes", Avicii describes the case of a man who is going through the transformation into a woman. Thus, through the lyrics and visuals, the DJ supports the right and social position of the transgender people. For sexual minorities, the need to adjust their identity to standards of society emerges as a problem that deprives them of the possibility to express themselves and maintain emotional stability. It also triggers discrimination at all levels of their social life, thus reducing its quality. Hence, Avicii's "Silhouettes" represents a change in the social position and problems faced by trans people as part of the LGBTQ community, where the past concealment of belonging is associated with greatness and suffering, while the acceptance of one's new self appears as the newborn generation. Avicii's "Silhouettes" correlates to the issues Janet Mock discusses in "I Was Born a Boy" and her difficulties with her transition. Mock states, "Once when I was 5 years old, a little girl who lived next door to my grandmother dared me to put on a miu-miu and run across a nearby parking lot. So I did. I threw it on, hiked it up in one hand, and ran like hell. It felt amazing to be in a dress, but suddenly my grandmother appeared, a look of horror on her face. I knew immediately that I had crossed some kind of line, and after yelling at me, she banished me to our patio where I played quietly with my sumo action figures for a while. I loved them because they had long hair and they were the only dolls okay for me, a boy, to play with." Mock's situation is the exact way in which young trans people develop an internal struggle with oneself, which only leads to self-depletion of the faded silhouette. It is evident that Avicii describes the process of the battle that divides one's life experience into a dark but socially acceptable before and a bright but intolerable after. Similarly to Mock's article, Avicii's "Silhouettes" can be perceived as an anthem for fighting for oneself and a motivation to take a step in redefining one's gender identity. The lyrics repeatedly use the expressions "we are the future, step forward" and others in the context of creating a new mentality where being transgender is positioned as normal and natural. Therefore, through the video, Avicii affirms that overcoming the difficulties of embracing one's gender identity and becoming transgender brings joy, pleasure, and understanding that can only be achieved after the physical transformation of oneself. The video sequence in Avicii's "Silhouettes" plays a vital role for the analysis. "Silhouettes" is filmed in an atmosphere of gloom and negativity which is created by predominantly using cold tones of a dark palette. The general idea of such a visual series is the representation of the initial difficulties, social problems, and rejection of oneself. For a viewer, the beginning of the video is associated with the start of a journey, implying the process of a transformation that is full of difficulties. The electric clock is a symbol of the beginning of a struggle throughout the early morning, while bottles of alcohol and drugs are indicators of self-rejection and the obvious emotional experiences that the character undergoes. However, in "Silhouettes", the issue of sexuality and gender is quite complicated. With the development of the plot, the genital dysmorphia of the protagonist of the video starts to show. For example, the music video draws an obvious contrast between male and female identity, where the identity is later presented as a cheerful trans woman who has gained freedom. It is clear that it is the rejection of oneself, one's image, and the status that are the main barriers to a normal life. Therefore, through the signs described in the video, it appears that the character turns to drugs and alcohol for some temporary relief as he is experiencing genital dysmorphia. The uniqueness of Avicii's work in the context of the LGBTQ position in society presents the need for transformation and changes in self-perception. Avicii is one of the few non-LGBTQ public figures who has correctly identified and interpreted the motives and special aspects of the transition process. Gender transition is not only the stage of an actual gender change by an individual, but also the change in perception of oneself, one's belonging, a sense of gender, comfort, and status. While the focus of the music video would have placed directly on the traditional definition of transition as a surgical process, the artist's deeper motive remains clear. First, there is a change in the emotional color of the character that is illustrated by the contrast in the video. The oppression, depression, loneliness, and the rejection of oneself in the gender role of a man as compared to the lightness, cheerfulness, and increased socialization in the role of a trans woman. Avicii presents the stage before as old school and the decision to change gender as newborn, where the new definition of the personality and external aspects, the character acquires the new mental self. Therefore, in Silhouettes, the transition is illustrated as a change in self-awareness and self-perception achieved through gender reassignment operation. Avicii represents the many challenges and struggles that the character faces in the video and the process of understanding themselves and becoming a transgender person. One of the most obvious problems is alcohol. It is apparent from the video that drinking hard alcohol is a common practice in the character's life, which is proved by the large number of empty bottles in the video. Silhouettes quite accurately describes the real-life experiences and struggles of LGBTQ people where alcohol and drug addiction is often the result of a mismatch of the inner self with social standards and the model of attitude towards such individuals which is shown. Thus, the addiction is developed due to the stigmatizing attitude of others towards the needs and personal traits of the LGBTQ people. For example, there may be structural divisions based on gender discrimination and ignoring special needs related to the definition of gender identity, among others. The main character of the video, Silhouettes, makes it clear that he disagrees with the old visual definitions of himself by reversing his self-portrait as a male. Consequently, as a result of the facing public every day and being treated as a man, the character most probably experienced stress and other emotional disorders that were triggered for alcoholism. Considering the problem of drugs raised in Silhouettes, there are two possible scenarios. The character may consider drugs as well as alcohol as an opportunity to remain a full member of society as a man, but such attitude contradicts the internal definition of oneself and leads to a negative emotional background, and the addiction leads to insignificant relief. This position is proved by the fact that the character took drugs and alcohol before leaving the house during a period of doubt and about the gender change and rejection of himself. But after having the surgery, it is clear that the drugs were replaced by a glass of water. Thus, changing the status by the transition to a trans woman allowed the character to eliminate the need for substances. It is noteworthy that in Silhouettes, Avicii does not try to present transformation as a solution to all problems of transgender people. As can be seen from the last scene of the music video, the transition to the status of a trans woman allowed the character to gain emotional peace, joy, acceptance of themselves, and finally meet a sexual partner who made the character feel comfortable. At the same time, the main theme of Silhouettes is that the transition does not create a new and idealized life, but gives the opportunity to be reborn in the conditions that are closer to the character, and thus allowing to build a future in harmony with oneself. Avicii showed that the life path of transgender people is more complex and lengthier than that of heterosexuals. Consequently, Silhouettes can be perceived as a struggle for the possibility of changing oneself in accordance with the individual's inner perception. Avicii's music video "Silhouettes" is one of the examples of a non-LGBTQ pop star's public and worldwide endorsement of transgender people. The visuals hold value since they clearly represent the emotional experiences, social isolation, and addiction of the character. At the same time, Silhouettes describes the process of transition to the status of a trans woman without putting emphasis on the operation itself as it can be interpreted during the initial acquaintance with the material. Instead, special attention is paid to the mental transition and willingness to present a new identity. Another aspect that deserves to be highlighted is the illustration of the transgender people through the prism of social problems and their consequences in the form of alcohol and drug addiction. Although these methods maintain the possibility of existence in an outdated traditional society, they pose a serious threat to sexual minorities. In this way, Avicii through Silhouettes expresses tolerance for the LGBTQ communities, represents support for the people's choice, and motivates them to redefine oppressive past and present and accept a new self both mentally and physically.